That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm Chad Dundas. That's Ben Folks. We're both longtime MMA journalists, and for the last 12 years, we've been meeting here every week to break down all the action in the wild, weird, and occasionally wonderful world of mixed martial arts. Ben, it's election day here in the United States of America, which I figure either means people will really want to listen to an hour of frivolous talk about mixed martial arts, or they won't pay even the slightest bit of attention to this
I
week's
I
co-main event
think
podcast. But here we are, man. Here we are. You know
yeah.
what? As we sit here on this Tuesday, podcasts haven't been made illegal yet. So we're going to
Hey,
do it.
don't you think even if this goes the way we don't want it to go, podcasts might remain the only form of media that is not made illegal?
I heard from Dana White that podcasts are the only place you can hear the truth
Yeah,
nowadays.
didn't he say that to noted crazy grifter Russell Brand?
Yeah, he
I
did.
mean, it is of course, Dana White, longtime noted purveyor of just saying stuff,
I thought you were going to
would
say truth and justice.
would have us believe that podcasts are the only form of media expression that really count, because podcasts are the ultimate just saying stuff form of media. We know that
Yeah.
because we get on here and we'll just say whatever. Sometimes people will correct us on a fact later on. We've seen a lot of other, let's say, notable podcasters who just say stuff all the time that is later proven, very easily proven to be false, and they never go back and correct it. It is, especially for a guy who feels like any sort of fact checking is a gotcha, is an unfair gotcha by the lamestream media. I can understand why he thinks just talking into a microphone to a person who either does not know or would not say if I were lying, that's the pinnacle. That's what this was all leading to in terms of media expression. Now, I will say for the younger listeners out there, they might not realize this, but there was a time in America where election day did not feel like teetering above the abyss. I dimly remember it. Do you?
Yeah. Yeah,
Times when
no, I
elections
do.
were just like, will it be this option or this? What I think is slightly worse, but not actively destructive option. I don't know. Tune in later tonight and we'll find out. And then we kind of go, huh, okay, and move on.
Yeah. Now it's like we're going to pull up a chair, grab a couple soda pops, and watch the thrilling primetime TV drama that will tell us whether or not the Republic likely survives for another 4 years. That's what we're doing nowadays, which is, no, it wasn't always like that. But maybe we can take your mind off it for the next 60 minutes or so. I'd love to sit here and tell you that everything that we're going to talk about is super upbeat this week, but that would be a lie. Bilal Muhammad, he's out of UFC 310 coming up in December, leaving us kind of scrambling around for a replacement. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We had Brandon Moreno and Aaron Blanchfield both get wins this past weekend at this UFC Fight Night up there in Edmonton. Derek Lewis pulled out under somewhat mysterious circumstances. And of course, Conor McGregor back in court over there in Ireland and facing some pretty ugly sexual assault allegations. So all that stuff is on the docket, plus listener mail, which we'll get to, I think, in the middle of the show. First, though, Ben, is honestly a little bit of breaking news over here from you. I know you got a story coming out today on Yahoo about some further details in the fighter antitrust lawsuit against the UFC, the recent settlement. You talked to some people, asked some what I'm sure were both fair but penetrating questions, and you said you had some further information for us here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of it is breaking news,
Ba,
but
dun, dun,
I
dun,
did. Oh yeah,
dun,
here's
dun,
what's been
dun, dun,
interesting.
dun, dun.
Just let me know when you're done. That's fine.
That's the breaking news music.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I thought maybe if it didn't it used to be like the telegraph noise, like, it's just coming across
With
the
the
wire.
a world maybe on the TV, a black
Yeah.
and white world spinning around with a
Uh-huh.
radio tower on top of it.
Yeah, and like little lightning bolts coming out of the radio tower. Um, I was surprised doing this story, reaching out to a lot of fighters, some of whom, just some people wanted to talk anonymously, and it turned out so that they wanted to talk anonymously because they were angry about some things, including how, you know, a notable list of people who were going to testify on behalf of the UFC, essentially against the fighters. And then, we didn't end up getting that far. They weren't going to be allowed to testify anyway. But as far as we know, they still stand to receive substantial payments.
Yeah.
And there were a few people who have not forgotten those names and want you to know that their sentiment on them is fuck them, which I can understand. Although I also appreciate, who I talked to, who was a great interview for this, is Gray Maynard, who you will note is one of the sanest fighter voices on Twitter when it comes to political issues and other stuff, and just a good guy all around. And he, when I told him, I heard a lot of people kind of throwing these guys' names around, and he was like, yeah, I get it. It's kind of tough to see somebody who is going to work against us, but also they got in there and did it too, and they were underpaid too. So they're looking out for their jobs with the UFC now, but I kind of get it, and it was just a reasonable person all around on it. I was surprised. I'd talked to a bunch of different people. Almost no one had any sort of idea how much money they would get from this settlement. We're talking about $375 million in the settlement. What the lawyers are asking for, this is again not yet finalized, but it seems like this one will be finalized. What they're asking for is a little over 115 million for 10 years of working on this case and expenses on experts and document storage and all kinds of other stuff, lawyer stuff that they did. This was what they were doing it for, is the hope that one day you're going to get that big check and it's all going to pay off. And the remainder will be split up among the fighters. Now, the way they're going to do it is there's two tiers to decide how you're going to do it. 70% of deciding how much money you get depends on how much money you got from the UFC. And that is not just in show and win money, but anything you got related to the fight itself. Not like sponsorships or, non-fight related money, but performance bonuses, locker room bonuses, pay-per-view percentages, any kind of money you got from the UFC for the fight. That is part of the 70% that goes into the payout. The other 30% is the number of fights that you had during the class period, which goes from end of 2010, like the last month of 2010, basically, to like June of 2017. Now, that cutoff is gonna bite some people in the ass, including Gray Maynard, who, looking at his, he had like 20 UFC fights. Only 9 of them count in the class period. 2 of those are title fights, though, so those would be pretty good. But like he had a fight in the UFC that was a week after the cutoff in
Oh man.
2017. Yeah, like 1 week later. So there's going to be some people who feel that sting a little bit. I was going around asking people, what do you expect to be paid? And some of them had heard an estimate. You know, some of them were in like 6 figures, some of them were high 6 figures. And some of the other ones, friend of the show, Danny Downs, when I asked him, and he was just like, I don't know, a few $1,000s, whatever. And like a lot of people, he had been sort of following the UFC lawsuit, but I heard from quite a few people who were like, I was aware it was happening. I didn't pay much attention to it because I felt like, man, the UFC has too many lawyers, too much money, too much power. They're going to make this go away. And the fact that it stretched on for 10 years did not lessen that feeling for them. And so then when they finally heard it, they were like, okay, who do I reach out to? Like, I've gotten messages from a lot of people who weren't really paying that close of attention until a settlement number came out, and they were like, okay, wait, what do I do? And all I know to do is point them at the website. But the minimum payment is $15,000. So everybody in the class will receive at least $15,000, which, not nothing. But one of the other things I heard from some people is, especially guys who haven't really thought about it in a long time. I talked to Aaron Riley, who was always a good, smart dude. He continues to do well. And he retired in like 2013. And so he fought a long time in those early days of MMA, had a bunch of great fights then, but only fought like 2 or 3 times during the class period. And his analogy was, he was like, well, hey, yeah, who doesn't like finding a $20 bill in the pocket of your pants that you didn't
Yeah.
know was there? That's sort of the feeling until you start to think about it. And then you go, oh, okay, I guess this, though, is them saying that they were kind of screwing me before and getting away with it. And then, years later, they're like, okay, here's some of that missing money. So different people had some mixed feelings about it and everything. As you know, and this, I do not envy the task of the lawyers and everybody involved, because now there's over 1,000 fighters in this class. They have to go through and try to make contact with them all. And you know how that's going to go.
They should hire some MMA journalists to do that.
It's tough work,
Give
man.
Damon Martin $20 an hour and just be like, find as many of these people as you can.
Yeah, because it's tough, some of them. Like, I've tried it, especially when working on this story where I was going back through my old Rolodex to be like, who do I know who's out there who hasn't fought in years but is in this class action? Like, just wanted to see, do they know about it? Have they thought about it? How do they feel about it? And, a lot of them you can still reach out to and get a hold of, but people's numbers have changed. One of the things one of the lawyers said to me was, he was like, well, we've got an email list we're emailing out. And I was like, fuck it, email? You're going to reach these guys via email? Good luck, man.
You'd be like, man, half these dudes' phones won't work anymore, and the other half, their voicemail box will be full.
Their voicemail box was never set up to begin with.
This is not our first rodeo. We've been trying to call these guys for 10 years.
It's also, let me tell you, related to the election, right now has been a tough time to be texting people who you haven't talked to in a while, who maybe don't have your number saved, trying to ask if they got a few minutes to talk for a story you're writing. Because you know how it is. My phone buzzes with a number I don't know, and if I open it up and I see like a paragraph and it starts with, "Hey Ben," I just go, fuck off.
Yep.
It's only a matter of time until you're telling me that it's important that I do whatever you think I should do, or society is going to unravel. I can't tell you how many voicemails I've gotten recently. And it's like, sorry, we missed you today, Patriot. And, shit like that. So it's like, you're trying to text these people right now. A lot of people I feel like are maybe not looking that closely at them. So I don't know. Good luck to them. They got their work cut out for them. Hopefully they can reach as many as possible, because there's going to be some people out there who you don't have any good contact info for, and who are not going to reach out to you because they got no idea this is happening.
Yeah. It is the most MMA stuff in the world that a lot of fighters were like, man, we're never getting any money out of that shit. But the UFC is involved. No, we're never going to get a red cent from those fuckers. And number two, now, even that the settlement has been reached, everybody's like, we have no idea how much money we're going to get. It's like fighting in the UFC. Is the fucking antitrust settlement going to give you a locker room bonus after the fight? You don't know how much it's going to be? We'll find out.
Well, and part of the process, it sounds like, is going to be, they're going to come back, once you sign, all the fighters have to do, sign and date the paperwork when they get it and say, yes, I'm
so
in.
many people aren't going to do that.
I know. But here's the thing. The payout for everybody else goes up the more fighters don't do it. So, if somebody managed to shame one of these people enough who are going to testify for the UFC, I'm like, you don't want that money, do you? You think everybody should stand on their own too? Tell them no. Then everybody else's payout goes up. And, as the lawyer said to me, he's like, if only one person signs and returns his paperwork, he gets all the money. If only 10 people do, they get all the money. So,
this sounds like a murder mystery shaping up.
See,
who killed all the fighters?
I was talking to Tom Lawler, who's been saying how he's been really trying to get the word out. And, he was actually in the courtroom for this latest hearing. He said he showed up to the courtroom in Las Vegas for the latest hearing, and he was thinking it'd be like a fighter reunion in there. And he was like, there were 2 other fighters who I saw, and maybe, other than the lawyers and court officials, maybe 15 total observers. And he was a little bit surprised that it wasn't more of a turnout, but he said he's been trying to get the word out. Got a video from the courthouse steps, and he's talking about trying to reach out to these people. And he was like, I know I'm working against my own interests here, because the more people you get involved, the less money that I'm going to get in the end. But, feels like it's the fair and right thing to do. But it also seems like, you got all these people out there. You're trying to get the word out to them and everything, and I don't. You could see how a lot of people maybe put this stuff behind them one way or another. They moved on to other areas of life, uh, and then you get this thing where it's like, we have concluded that the UFC kind of screwed you. They sort of agreed, at least tacitly. Here's your check for it. And you kind of hold that paper in your hands, and it might be, you know, one reminder of this previous life you had, and also them being like, and there's the last penny you'll get from it. I can see how you might have mixed feelings about a thing like that. But also, part of the process they said is going to be, we'll come to you with, here's how many fights we think you had in the class period, and here's what we were told from the UFC, who had to disclose all the fighter pay, what you got, and you can kind of agree or disagree with that. It'll be interesting if there's significant disagreement, especially about the money, because when I said, hey, does this include locker room bonuses? And they said, yeah, at least according to what the UFC told us. Now, you would think that in that portion of the disclosure of the trial, the UFC would have a reason to disclose every possible penny it had paid out to fighters, because it wants to make the case we didn't underpay them. It'll be interesting if there are some people being like, oh, I don't know. They gave me a check for $50,000 just because they thought I did a good job, didn't tell anybody about it. And that's not on here. I'd also be curious how many fighters have meticulous records about how much they were paid. But
There's
we'll
so
see.
many of them that aren't going to have a clue. I remember doing that athletic survey where part of it was we asked them how much money they made for a fight and how little money they made for a fight. And many of them had no idea. Although a lot of them remembered the least that they got paid.
Yeah, that stands out in the memory because they were like, I beat this guy up for $50 in a parking lot uh, in a fight that I agreed to at a bar the day before. So yeah, one thing though that several people stressed to me, and that I will say again, just on the off chance there are any fighters in the class listening to the sound of my voice right now, you don't need anybody else's help to get this money. People are going to tell you you do. Anytime there's a class action like this, there are whole cottage industries of people who are going to pop up and tell you you need their help to get your money. And they will take a cut of your money in order to basically do what you could do yourself, which is just sign and date a piece of paper and send it back through the US mails. You don't need any of that help. If your manager or anybody else comes to you and is just like, hey, yeah, I should handle this for you. No, no, they should not. You don't need them to do that. And as one of the attorneys pointed out to me, he was like, some managers are probably going to go to fighters and be like, I deserve a cut of your settlement money as your manager during this time period. Now, whether you have a contract with them that will say that or not, his advice was, you get the money first. Tell them,
Yeah.
we'll work it out later. Sign and date your paperwork, send it back, get the money in hand, and then figure out whether you owe them any of it or not. But don't let them be an intermediary. You don't put anybody between you and that money, because you don't have to. You have to do shockingly little in order to get your money. So don't let anybody else tell you otherwise.
The other thing that I feel like is somewhat heartbreaking is that you also know there is going to be a percentage of fighters who don't even find out about this until after the money has all been distributed. And then they will come looking for it, and people will have to be like, sorry, you missed the deadline. We handed it all out.
They got some time. It hasn't been finalized yet, the settlement, and they estimate that in around March or April is when they should get paperwork to sign it, and then the money won't start going out until the summer of 2025. So they got a little time, you know. But one of the things I read through all those declarations that fighters submitted, the ones where we heard, how bad things have gotten for guys like Shane Carwin recently, and we think a lot about brain stuff in fight sports, but way more you see people talking about just sort of like orthopedic
Yeah.
issues that they're still dealing with, which, makes a lot of sense. But there are people who are out there being like, I'm probably going to need a hip replacement here soon. And so many of the people in these declarations were like, I don't have health insurance right now. It's expensive as hell to buy private health insurance. And so they're just like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. I probably need physical therapy. I can't get it. UFC will pay for it. You break your hand in the fight, you tear your shoulder or something in the fight, the UFC's insurance, they'll pay to repair that. But if it's giving you problems 10 years later, 15 years later, you're on your own for that. And a lot of them are just like, I don't have the money to pay for it out of pocket. I saw one where Matt Mitrione was talking about having neck surgery and paying for it out of pocket, and other people being like, I'm still not fully recovered from my injuries because I wasn't able to get the kind of physical therapy I needed. And some of them are known names where you're like, yeah, no, that person went through some shit in the cage. And some of them where you're just like, I never heard of this person before. They
Yeah.
fought in 4 fights during the class period, and I couldn't tell you who they were, but they still did it. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff where, and I talked to Gray Maynard about that, where he was like, I filled out one of those declarations, and I know people probably look at it and be like, they want to make it seem way worse than it is. But he said, the lawyers just called me and were like, how are you doing? What would you use the money for? And he was just sort of like, I don't know, kids' college funds. Like they weren't being like, tell us a sob story.
Yeah.
So the people who you do hear the sob story from, believe it, because some people are really dealing with that stuff.
All right, we got lots to talk about. We are going to get into Bilal Muhammad dropping out of his title defense against Shavkat Rachmanov. We're going to talk about Brandon Moreno. We're going to talk about Aaron Blanchfield if we have time, and then maybe get into some of this other stuff. First, though, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
All right, Ben, this will get us into some of that talk because our first piece of listener mail this week comes to us from Hair Danny Boy III, who writes, Bilal is out. It's Alex P versus Ankalaev. That's 4 title defenses in 8 months. It's going to be announced shortly since it takes Alec, I think he means Alex, no time to count his fucks. He has none. Yeah, I got you. Well, we don't know. That's been one of the options that we have heard about since Bilal Muhammad has had to pull out of this UFC 310 fight against Shavkat, that boy good Rachmanov, due to his toe swelling up like a Thanksgiving turkey due to an infection in his bones, which, as we talked about last week, was a thing we didn't even know could happen. And now that we do know, that is something that I do not want for myself or anyone else that I do know. I don't want an infection in anyone's bones.
No.
But that's what Bilal Muhammad caught here. He's out of the fight, leaving the UFC with a matchmaking conundrum heading into UFC 310. Well, first, let's talk just a little bit about what this means for Bilal. We talked about this over on the Patreon page on Friday during the Power Hour. You mentioned that if you're going to fight Shavkat Rachmanov, you better make sure you're 100%. Yeah. And so you don't want to come into that fight with a banged up toe or a banged up any other thing. And so Bilal Muhammad was probably wise to pull out of this. I wondered if pulling out was also sort of a catch-22, since the UFC didn't seem that high on you in the first place, made you do everything you could possibly do before they even gave you a title shot. And now, you're dropping out of your first title defense. That probably doesn't endear you any further to the boss. Where are you at on your thinking as we sit here on Tuesday?
I would hope people are not, boss or fans or anybody, not giving Bilal a hard time about pulling out of that fight, because look at that man's foot. Conor McGregor, as you said, posted a picture of his toe and had to include little arrows to show you where the hurt was. Bilal Muhammad didn't need to do that. He needed to post a picture of that foot with looking like it had a sausage in the middle of it, and everybody goes, yeah, I get that. There's no way you're even going to be able to train very well for a while on that. You're not going to go in and fight Shavkat Rachmanov in your first title defense, because if you lose, nobody's going to want to hear about your toe, bro, and nobody's going to have any sympathy for you. He's been in this game long enough that he knows how that works. So pulling out of that fight is the absolute right thing to do. Shavkat's tough, man. That's a tough matchup for absolutely anybody. And man, the question of what to do without that fight on it, like, I think I said this last week on the Power Hour maybe, but we can't keep sending Alex Pereira you up texts every single time some shit happens. That can't be the answer all the time. He had talked about how some of the things he went through trying to step up and take this Khalil fight. I just saw a story the other day about him talking about how he's still having problems with one of his hands from punching Khalil Roundtree in the face roughly 500 times. So let's not keep doing this until it turns out to be a terrible idea. Let's come up with something else, man. It doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah. To that end, you had Shavkat Rachmanov come out here and call out Kamaru Usman for a potential interim welterweight title fight. That seems like an advantageous call out to me by Shavkat Rachmanov. We had a couple of
advantageous. You mean he trying to pick a good one for himself? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, trying to pick a guy who seemed legitimate that you could argue makes sense for an interim title fight, but also a guy that Shavkat would probably tool up. And so that to me seems like an advantageous move by Shavkat Rachmanov. Do we need an interim title here? We don't totally know Bilal's recovery time, but once you get the infection out of the bone, assuming you get to keep the toe, it seems like you could come back relatively quickly from this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what it's like to deal with a bone infection in your toe, but yeah, if it's 6 months from now, yeah, I think we could wait. I understand Shavkat's thinking absolutely, because if you're going, hey, how do I stay busy in the meantimes, and how do I also, if I can get an interim belt, then I go into the title fight getting points on the pay-per-view, rather than go in on whatever my current contract is and nothing else. And that could be a big difference in money for him. So I don't blame him for trying to find some way to turn this to his advantage. But if you could book it any time, you think you can book it any time in the next 6 months, then I say you could wait. It just seems like whatever you're going to try to, like, we in this sport are so quick to forget about what the word interim actually means when it comes to these interim titles. Because sometimes it seems like the interim could be 3 months, or you could be walking around like Big Tommy Aspinall and the interim could be indefinitely whenever we get around to it. So I don't know, man. I do think it depends a lot on the timeline, but I'm willing to wait for Shavkat and Bilal, because that just seems like the fight in the division.
We got this question from Patrick Milder. I knew as soon as I saw that Aaron Blanchfield had this come from behind victory over Rose Namajunas, I was like, well, we're going to get an email from the Milders. And we did. From Patrick Milder this week. My wife's favorite fighter, Aaron Blanchfield, won on Saturday. However, she has looked a little flat in her last two outings compared to her initial debut and rise up the ranks. What's next for the 25-year-old prodigy, Cowabunga and Whimsy to you both? It's a good performance, I guess, by Aaron Blanchfield. She looked like she was getting touched up by Rose Namajunas through about 2 rounds and then came back, win the last 3 for a 48-47 unanimous decision across the board. She is, I think, a very interesting prospect at that age, 25 years old. And, I don't think it's that unusual that as fighters climb up the ranks, they start looking less and less impressive for the obvious reason that they are fighting more difficult opponents.
Yeah.
And that unless you are, George St. Pierre or somebody, you start fighting that tougher competition, the margin of victory is probably naturally going to get a little smaller.
Yeah, and it's not like she's fighting a chump. She's fighting Rose Namajunas, former champ. She's going to be a tough fight for a whole lot of people, and she won. So I don't know how you can come away being too disappointed with that. It's also like worth reminding ourselves that Aaron Blanchfield is 25. There's a lot of development that could still happen there. So yeah, I'd say, you go into that fight, you end up being one of the main features or the co-main event in that fight. You come away with a win, nothing to be upset about there.
Yeah. We got this one in from Shad Rap, who says, Shad Rap reporting live from Edmonton Fight Night. We had Air Jourdain at bantamweight, the middle-aged Punisher, Fuck Trudeau chants, Patient Mike Malott, a Bigfoot, and the Assassin Baby is back. But my real question is, are these 5-round co-main events with no belt new? They've been doing this for a little while. Not every show, but it seems like there have been instances where we have been able to decide on a case-by-case basis which fights should be 5 rounds and which fights should be 3 rounds, which I frankly have always been a proponent of. I understand you want all title fights to be 5 rounds. That makes sense to me. It has never made sense to me that all main events are going to be 5 rounds and other fights are all going to be 3 rounds, which is a thing that the UFC has conditioned us over a lot of years now to view as normal. But it's never really made sense to me because it's sort of like you are dictating the length of a fight, not based around the people who are going to be in it. You are basing it around the quality of the other fights that are happening on the same night as that fight. Because, if you have a non-title contender fight that is going to be the main event of a fight night, it's going to be 5 rounds. You take that same fight, you put it on a pay-per-view card, it's not the main event, then suddenly it's 3 rounds. That doesn't make any sense. So I applaud this, frankly, a move to be able to pick and choose a little bit about which fights are going to be 5 rounds and which fights are going to be 3 rounds. In this case, Aaron Blanchfield, probably lucky we had a 5-rounder here, because if it was a 3-rounder, she would have lost.
As long as they're paying them more to fight 5 rounds, then I agree with it. Because you're asking a considerable amount of more work to prepare for a 5-round fight. That's something I've heard from fighters a lot over the years, is that, you need to be in one kind of shape for a 3-round fight, and you need to be in a different kind of shape for a 5-rounder. Whether you go 5 rounds or not, you have to prepare for it. So as long as there's a payout difference, then I'd say yes. You're right, though, that it would affect your thinking if somebody comes to you and they say with this matchup, hey, we want you to fight this guy. And the same way I remember fighters used to talk about trying to ask about what size cage we're going to be using, depending on matchup, where it's like, hey, if I want to take this guy down, I want to fight in that small cage, so that I just don't have to go looking for him as much, and I've increased my chances of a takedown. Some of these fights where it's like, this is somebody who starts fast and is good in round 1 and 2, but I think I take over late in the fight, you might be better off seeing if we could co-main a UFC fight night somewhere, whether it's the Apex or somewhere else, just so that I get the time to work that's going to suit my style and my game plan.
I believe it was Dan Hardy who told me years ago that he fought George St. Pierre for the UFC welterweight title in his 5th UFC fight. And it was the last fight on his original contract. And it was a 5-rounder, which he pointed out to me in conversation is almost 2 fights.
Yeah.
1 round short of being 2 fights, if you think about a regular fight being 3 rounds. So not only did he not get paid more because it was a 5-round fight, he also got paid the same as he would have got paid for any other fight. He didn't get more money for fighting for the title. He got paid whatever was his contractual amount for the last fight on his first UFC contract. So he did not get paid as much as you might think to go out there and fight George St. Pierre. All right, that's going to do it for listener mail this week. We got a lot of stuff we're still going to try to get to. Apologies to anybody's emails that we did not get into, but we're going to talk a little bit about Brandon Moreno at the moment. Ben Folks, Brandon Moreno goes out there, looks impressive, frankly, in his unanimous decision win against Amir Albazi, busts up his face, especially in the final round there. It seemed like you might have been a minute or 2 away from getting a stoppage. Maybe if we decided to go 7 minutes for our final round, your guy Brandon Moreno might have been able to get a stoppage, but instead we settle for the unanimous decision. An impressive performance, I think, by Brandon Moreno for the former flyweight champion who had been coming off back-to-back losses to Pantoja and Brandon Royval. So a much-needed win for him, and one that I think served to remind us that, oh yeah, he's really, really good.
Yeah. And, I was listening to or watching Ariel's show where he's talking to Brandon Moreno's coach, and he made a good point about how, especially at this level where you're a former champ, you're still right there near the top of the division. And so all the fights are going to be tough fights. And the margin that a lot of those fights are decided by is incredibly small, especially at a weight class like this, where it's so competitive. There are so many good, talented fighters in that weight class. And so, you go out there, you have a performance like this, you kind of start to pull away later in the fight. And it's just sort of like, you need that to maintain your place in the pecking order. The other guy, it's a pretty big deal for him if he can come out there and beat you. But there are just no easy nights of work at the flyweight division in general, but especially at that level of it. And so for Brandon Moreno to have been, honestly, as good and as consistent as he has been, where even if you beat Brandon Moreno, you're not going to beat him by a whole lot most of the time, So that's impressive that how long he's been at that level.
Hot times right now at flyweight.
Yeah.
Frankly, you had this fight, Brandon Moreno and Amir Albazi, at this event coming off, a few weeks ago when we had Brandon Royval beat Tatsuro Taira. You got a title defense for Alexander Pantoja coming up at UFC 310 against Kai Asakura. That is the remaining title fight on UFC 310 at the moment. We'll have to see how things develop from here. But it's, if you are a person who cares to look deeply enough into the action here, this is actually kind of an interesting time at flyweight. You got all these top contenders fighting it out in close proximity to each other, and you have a title fight that seems like a bit of a wild card because you have Kai Asakura, the former Ryzen bantamweight champion, coming in for his first ever UFC fight. He's not even ranked. He's not even in the UFC rankings, and they're going to go ahead and fast forward that guy straight into a title shot, which is not something that happens every day. Kai Asakura, 21-4. He's coming off a win over Juan Archuleta over there in Ryzen in December of 2023. And so, yeah, that is an interesting matchup, and I think one that it's kind of exciting, frankly. It breathes a little life into the old days when you could have top fighters come in from other organizations and basically vault to the top of the UFC within a fight or two.
Yeah, and one of the ways that is legit is how many of the fighters in that division have been just sort of like openly supportive of it. Because if they thought it was bullshit for a guy to come in and get a title shot right away, they'd tell you.
Yeah.
They'd let you know, because they'd be like, I should be getting that title shot. And instead, you had a whole bunch of those guys, when asked about it, just be like, yeah, no, I got no problem with that. That guy, it's legit for that guy to do it. And they'd tell you if it wasn't legit. So that is one to get excited about. You're right. I would have thought maybe the days of that happening were just kind of over with. Just because where else are you going to be doing enough to where the UFC wants to sign you as a free agent once you can get out of your contract there? And then also, they don't even want to mess around with trying to build you up as a contender. We'll just throw you in there right away. One could argue maybe we all learned some lessons from the great Crow Cop Gabriel Gonzaga situation that happened, where, hey, we were going to bring Crow Cop in after buying Pride, and instead of having him fight Randy Couture for the heavyweight title, we said, let him kick Gabriel Gonzaga in the head instead. And it did not go like that. It went the other way. And, we ended up still got kind of a good fight out of it with Gabriel Gonzaga and Randy Couture. But that was some old UFC versus Pride fantasy matchmaking shit that we almost had with Crow Cop versus Randy Couture for the title.
Yeah. Yeah. Not many guys that you could see or envision this kind of treatment to, maybe a Johnny Eblin, maybe an Umar Nurmagomedov, Big Fran, obviously in a crazy mixed up backward world where suddenly he woke up and he was back in the UFC.
Friends become enemies, enemies become friends.
Yeah. You guess you might be able to make a case for Phil DeFries. Hasn't he gone a ungodly amount of time without a loss at heavyweight? But definitely unusual to have someone come in and score that UFC title shot right away. Remember, you're listening to the Co-Main Event Podcast Proper. This show drops every Tuesday afternoon for free in your timelines and your podcast libraries. But if you want even more of the co-main event, you can find Ben Folks and myself all week over on Patreon. Hit us up at patreon.com/co-main event and get loads of extra audio and video content, as well as access to our official Discord message board where they're talking fights and a lot of other stuff all the time. Hit us up at patreon.com/co-main event. We got a bunch of handy tiers of patronage. Join the team at patreon.com/co-main event. You know what we're starting to get into, Ben? We're on the precipice. We're tiptoeing up to the line. In fact, the people in your life who seriously have their shit together may have already begun, but we are just dipping our toe into the freezing cold pool of holiday shopping.
Oh, wow. It's exciting and terrifying.
It's November. It's going to be Thanksgiving before you know it. My daughter has insisted already that we start playing Christmas music around the house. The holidays are coming. And if you got that special someone in your life that seems like they have it all, brother, let me point you in the right direction. Go over to comainevent.com and check out our merchandise shop. We got t-shirts, we got hats, we got hoodies, we got lots more. One thing you could get for Christmas, if you get in now while supplies last, is that you might be able to hook yourself up with one of our best-selling Daddest Man on the Planet coffee mugs. They are perfect for any dad-type figure in your life. Get one of those. You could get yourself a Dundasso t-shirt. You could get a Bobby Nuck shirt for the Robert Whitaker fan that you know. You could get a Vulcamania shirt. We got it all. Go to our website, comainevent.com, and click the link at the top of the page that says shop. As always, we partner with our friends at Superconductor on the shop. They are a brand and design studio from Portland, Oregon. We can't recommend them highly enough for all your design needs. Hit them up at studiosuperconductor.com. And Ben, when we come back after the break, what in the hell is going on with Conor McGregor now?
Oh, boy.
Ben, we've said this before, but one of the ways that you know the terrible point that we've gotten to with Conor McGregor is that when you see these headlines that he has been taken to court in a civil suit at this point to face charges of sexual assault, our first response is, which one?
Yep.
That is a sad commentary on where we are at with perhaps the most famous MMA fighter in the world. And the Conor McGregor civil trial over there in Ireland began today. There's some live updates over there on Twitter and in the Irish news. If you want to go follow them, they are terrible because we're not really beating around the bush at all in terms of what happened here, the allegations of what happened here. And it is just another reminder that there is simply too much smoke around Conor McGregor for there not to be a considerable amount of fire behind all of these stories, frankly.
Yeah. It's depressing, man, to think about. And the accounts coming from the courtroom there, I was following it because the big homie Pete Carroll turned me on to Paul Healy's Twitter, who is updating it for the Irish Mirror. And the accounts from the courtroom are just harrowing, don't hardly say it, you know? And I understand that a lot of people, when they hear stuff like this, they hear this news, and then, especially when the athlete or celebrity in question is just like, oh, it's just somebody trying to get paid. That's just what it's like to be rich, famous athlete, is that people are always lobbing this stuff against you, trying to find some way to get a quick payday out of it. And it's like, well, first of all, it seems to make life miserable for any woman who brings any sort of sexual assault allegation. Like, nobody looks at what somebody goes through after they make that allegation and be like, that looks fun. That looks like a way I would like to spend a portion of my life, even if there was a payout at the end of it. But also, if that's the case, why isn't it constantly happening to other far richer, more famous athletes? Why isn't it happening to tons of NBA, NFL players all the time? If it's just happening over and over again to Conor McGregor because he's just a target due to wealth and fame. That's the part nobody can answer for me.
Well, we know that false sexual assault allegations are rare. And even if you are a celebrity, the level of Conor McGregor, even if you have the money of a Conor McGregor, maybe there would be one. Maybe if you are the unlucky or undeserved person who falls victim to a false sexual assault allegation, but not like a half dozen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know. I've lost count at this point how many allegations there are against Conor McGregor for assault, sexual and otherwise. And so there's just, essentially no way that he's not guilty of some of this stuff. And by the way, every time Conor McGregor has been accused of something where there is some manner of visual evidence, whether it be video or what have you, the video always shows that he did exactly what he was accused of doing, right? Punching old men in bars, smashing phones outside the Fontainebleau. So I don't think there's any question about the character of Conor McGregor at this point. And the character is poor. It's very poor. It's criminal, frankly. And you're not going to see any jail time, no matter what happens with this case. But you could see, given my limited understanding of the Irish judicial system, you could see Conor McGregor found liable for a sexual assault, which is meaningful in and of itself. But you also know, as soon as he gets back to training hard and he's ready, that the UFC is going to welcome him with open arms, no matter what the case is.
See, and that's the thing, especially when we were just told by Dana White that one of the reasons he was done with Francis Ngannou is because he's not a good guy. Which, again, it does not seem that being a good guy is a requirement for the UFC to want to do business with you elsewhere. It also, we've never heard really any substantial claims about what would make Francis Ngannou not a good guy, other than in Dana White's eyes asking for more money. So, it's hard to square those two things in your mind. I know this feeling is kind of frequent for us living in the current cultural moment, but it just feels like you're going crazy, doesn't it? When somebody is asking you to believe those two conflicting things at once. This guy's a bad guy. Don't want to be in business with him. That's why we offered him a bunch of money to stay and are mad that he didn't take it. This other guy, though, we think he'll be back early next year. Hopefully.
Frankly, there are a lot of things that make you feel crazy in this mixed up world of ours. So this is a story to continue monitoring. On a much lighter note, the Black Beast Derek Lewis had to drop out of his fight this past weekend at the UFC Fight Night with a medical condition that we are told was not weight cut related, was not fight related.
But was it balls hot related? Did he suffer from balls was hotitis?
You would hate to think that his balls got too hot and he was unable to fight. But at this point,
it be just some shit if years later, after the viral "my balls was hot" moment, Derek Lewis is like, I found out that I do in fact have a serious medical condition, and that's what that was. And he's just trying to raise awareness now, so other people know that if your balls get too hot, it's not a thing that's going to be solved just by taking off your shorts on TV. You do need to see a doctor.
Yeah. We still don't know what this was, but you got to think it'd be something a little bit serious to keep Derek Lewis from fighting, right? Derek Lewis seems like one of the most I will go out there and fight anybody regardless of what is going on with me at the moment kind of guys we can think of.
Yeah, might even eat a rack of ribs before he does it sometimes. And he seemed like he was in good shape and ready for this fight.
One of the things about that is he showed up to the pre-fight press conference and appears to have a bone to pick with Daniel Cormier. Scumbag Daniel Cormier, he called him. I have no idea what that could be about. Although these two have gone back and forth in the press before, I don't understand what the beef is here.
Okay, I could not really tell about this. And maybe some of this is just like the sense of humor we've gotten used to from Derek Lewis. I was like, wait, is he being serious right now? Derek Lewis needs to find some way to let us know when he's doing a Derek Lewis bit and when he's being serious. Because I at first thought, no, he's not. He's just fucking with us, right?
Hard to know. But maybe we'll get some more information on that sometime in the future. Don't forget, you got a UFC fight night this weekend. Neil Magny and Carlos Pratas going to go out there and do it in the welterweight division. Cody Garbs also on this card. Remember, unless I missed some news that he re-signed, Cody Garbs is he's at the end of his contract, is he not? He said that he wants to return to the UFC, but there might be some other people out there, BKFC, who could be vying for his services.
I know that every once in a while we get an email from somebody who is just like, I find it easy to believe that Cody Garbrandt is already in the BKFC. If you told me he'd signed 6 months ago, I would have believed that. So I don't know. I do feel bad sometimes for fighters where we just assume that if they got a good offer from the BKFC, they would jump at it. Where there got to be some people out there, we heard this a little bit from Brendan Schaub that we were talking about last week, where when you propose that idea to them, like, oh, hell no, I don't want to do that shit. Even if I did, my wife wouldn't let me do that shit. We all just act like, well, yeah, sure, of course you would want to go get in a bare knuckle boxing match for the organization that is notable for the gushing of blood and the losing of teeth in their fights. And I imagine there'd be some people who are like, I got into MMA to do MMA. I did not get in it for this, so leave me alone and stop assuming I would do it.
Yeah, but Cody Garbrandt's not one of those people. Right? If Cody Garbrandt hears the music, he's going to dance. Right?
I think you're stereotyping that man based on his physical appearance. You're saying Cody Garbrandt looks like a dude who just would do some bare knuckle. And I don't disagree with you there.
Number one, but I'm also basing it on everything we know about Cody Garbrandt up to this point.
He does have a bare knuckle haircut. I'll say that.
All right, that's going to do it this week for the Co-Main Event podcast, Ben Folks, unless there's anything else you wanted to bring up.
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Try to keep your wits about you out there, people. We'll be back to talk to you next week, unless you join up over on the Patreon page. Then we'll talk to you tomorrow for the live chat. Thursday for Doing the Damn Thing. Probably we'll have some stuff to talk about on Thursday, I would think. And then Friday for the Power Hour, patreon.com/co-main event. Check us out over there. If not, we appreciate the listens. For right now, we are done. We are through. We are out. You know who's also on this fight night card this weekend?
Who?
She's going to be standing out there looking like she's waiting for an Uber to come pick her up and take her home from the club.
Carolina Kovalevich?
Talking about Carolina Kovalevich.
Yeah.
She's going to fight Denise Gomes, coming in off a loss. But previous to that, she'd won 4 in a row. What you think about that? Carolina Kovalevich, resurgent.
To be out here leaning on the fence. Maybe give you a little wink when the camera pans to her during the introductions.
Yeah. Neil Magny, Cody Garbs, Carolina Kovalevich, Gerald Mearshart, Jillian Robertson, Easy Dos Santos. Some people we've heard of this weekend on this fight night over there at the Apex. Can't wait to talk all about it.